When during New York's 1929 Easter parade, a group of young women marched with cigarettes in hand, it was a defiant protest against gender inequality. When in 1954 the Guatemalan government was overthrown in a CIA-backed coup, it was a righteous fight against communism in America's backyard. And when in 1990 the US military advanced into Kuwait and Iraq, starting the first Gulf War, it was justified based on the terrible war crimes committed by the Iraqis. But all of these inciting events were PR stunts, moments manufactured to sway public opinion, and all based on the work of one man. On March 31, 1929, during New York's Easter parade, a group of 10 young women walked down New York's Fifth Avenue and happily lit up cigarette after cigarette. While women smoking wasn't unusual, women openly smoking in public was. There was a stigma attached to women smoking. While perfectly acceptable for men, women smoking was seen as a corrupt and inappropriate habit. In 1851, when actor, dancer and liberal provocateur Lola Montez posed in a photograph with a cigarette so effectively highlighted against her black gloved hand, it was intended to be controversial. Ladies in 1851 did not smoke, and the very notion that women and girls might be experimenting with cigarettes was certainly not acknowledged publicly. Smoking by women in North America and Europe had long been associated with loose morals and dubious behavior. So widespread was the social stigma attached to women smoking that as late as 1908, a woman in New York was arrested for smoking a cigarette in public. And in 1921, a bill was proposed in the US Congress to ban women from smoking in the District of Columbia. The appeal of smoking, however, was greater than the stigma, and smoking among women continued to grow, but the final hurdle was smoking in public. As the 10 women defiantly marched in the Easter parade, smoking cigarette after cigarette, the supposed organizer of the campaign, Bertha Hunt, was asked by a reporter how she had arrived at the idea of a women's smoking march. She answered that she first got the idea for this campaign when a man with her in the street asked her to extinguish her cigarette as it embarrassed him. I talked it over with my friends, and we decided it was high time something was done about the situation. Press coverage at the time hailed the young women's march, during which they proudly smoked their torches of freedom. Smoking in public was a feminist symbol of emancipation and equality. What wasn't reported was that the march had been organized by a man who would become known as the father of public relations, Edward Bernays, on behalf of his client, the American Tobacco Company. The Easter Women's March was a publicity stunt. Edward Bernays was born on November 22, 1891 in Austria. His family emigrated to the United States a year later, and his father became a successful grain merchant on the New York commodity exchanges. His mother, Anna Freud, was the younger sister of Sigmund Freud. Bernays did visit his uncle, but they weren't in regular contact, so it's unclear how much Freud influenced Bernays' work in the publicity business. But Bernays was never shy about the connection, and it no doubt helped him attract clients. Bernays enrolled in Cornell University's prestigious agriculture program, but when he graduated, he had no interest in agriculture and was instead determined to become a journalist. Back in Manhattan, he became the editor of a medical journal. His position at the Medical Review of Reviews led to his first foray into public relations. In 1913, he learned that the actor Richard Bennett planned to produce Damaged Goods, a play warning of the dangers of venereal disease. But the controversial nature of the play was making it difficult for Bennett to raise funds for the project. Bernays volunteered to help. He set up a sociological fund committee to finance the production and rally public support. Bernays enlisted so many prominent citizens to the cause that no one, not even the censors, could question the respectability of the play. Damaged Goods opened without incident and was hailed as a valuable contribution to public awareness. Bernays had found a new career. On the 1st of May 1915, the RMS Lusitania left New York en route to Liverpool. War had erupted across Europe the previous year, and when German U-boat U-20 torpedoed and sank the passenger ship, nearly 1,200 passengers and crew were killed, including 128 Americans. The sinking of the Lusitania set in motion a series of events that would bring America into World War I. In April of 1917, President Woodrow Wilson officially asked Congress to declare war on Germany. Wilson had been re-elected the previous year, campaigning on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." The president's change of heart was deeply unpopular with the American people, who felt that the war was a European war about European interests. The Wilson administration created the Committee on Public Information, the first modern propaganda office, to sway public opinion and drum up support for the American war effort. The Committee on Public Information was headed by ex-newspaperman George Creel. Bernays was brought in to head up the committee's Latin news service. After the war, Bernays returned to New York to apply what he had learned to the business world. As the world's first Council on Public Relations, he promised to actively shape public opinion in the interests of his clients. The First World War proved to be a watershed in the emancipation of women. During the war, many women had not only taken on typically male jobs, but they had also started to wear trousers, play sport, and cut their hair. In the early 1920s, when famed ballroom dancer Irene Castle cut her hair into a bob, millions of women stormed the beauty parlors to copy the short style. Hairnet makers were in a state of panic, Bernays recalled. Hairpin manufacturers were laying off workers, the hair comb industry was in disarray. Bernays was hired by Veneta Hairnets to reverse the trend. Bernays arranged for safety experts to issue warnings of precisely what could happen if a woman went to work without a hairnet and got her hair caught in the machinery. Health experts came forward to speak of the horrors of food contamination if cooks and waitresses worked without hairnets. His campaign wasn't particularly effective in convincing women to abandon the bob in favor of longer styles, but it certainly made an impact with the men in government. Laws were hastily passed in many states, making hairnets mandatory for certain jobs. The war had also prompted many women to take up another male habit, smoking, and it's here that Edward Bernays does the work that he is most remembered for. George Washington Hill, president of the American Tobacco Company, realized the huge potential in this new market and hired Bernays to help market his cigarettes to women. They began by targeting women's waistlines. The timing could not have been better, as slimness was coming into fashion along with bobbed hair and short skirts. Bernays and Hill saw the potential of selling cigarettes to women as a way to satisfy hunger. The 1925 Lucky Strike campaign, Reach for a Lucky instead of a Sweet, was one of the first media campaigns targeted at women. The campaign was wildly successful, but the social norms of the time created a situation where women were only smoking in private. There was still a stigma attached to smoking in public. George Hill had asked Bernays, "How can we get women to smoke on the street? They're smoking indoors, but damn it, if they spend half the time outdoors and we can get them to smoke outdoors, we'll damn near double our female market." Bernays needed advice and consulted the psychiatrist A.A. Brill, who had been a pupil of Bernays' uncle, Sigmund Freud. "What," he asked Brill, "is the psychological basis for a woman's desire to smoke?" "Cigarettes are equated with men," Brill replied, "and they become torches of freedom." And that was Bernays' inspiration. Bernays' secretary Bertha Hunt posed as a women's rights advocate and sent a telegram to a number of debutantes reading, "In the interests of equality of the sexes and to fight another sex taboo, I and other young women will light another torch of freedom by smoking cigarettes while strolling on Fifth Avenue Easter Sunday." And while some newspapers suspected a publicity stunt, most presented it as a campaign of emancipated women, some going so far as to praise the health benefits of cigarettes. Neither Bernays nor American tobacco were ever mentioned by name in the press reports. Their camouflage, a crucial element in the legitimacy of the campaign, remained intact. The Torches of Freedom campaign became a legendary milestone in the history of public relations. It's still cited in marketing textbooks, which claim that it caused a national debate and changed the smoking habits of women across the world. But some are more skeptical, suggesting that although there was significant media coverage, it was by no means as influential on women's smoking habits as we have been led to believe. In fact, the overblown reports of the campaign's success could be just one more piece of PR from Edward Bernays. What can't be disputed, however, is that Bernays' methods opened a new chapter in public relations. In 1928, he published his seminal book, Propaganda, in which he argued that it was the duty of the intelligent minority of society to manipulate the unthinking group mind. Bernays believed this was in the interest of freedom and democracy, and soon he'd play a role in toppling a burgeoning democracy. In the early 1940s, Bernays took on a new client, the United Fruit Company. Bernays' work began innocently enough. He was hired by United Fruit's president, Sam Zamurray, to work alongside the company's publicity director, Ed Whitman, to help boost sales in the US. The company's primary business was bananas, and business was good. The United Fruit Company had a near monopoly in Central America, in countries that would become known as banana republics, such as Costa Rica, Honduras, and Guatemala. The company was the largest employer in the region and, in Guatemala, the single largest landowner, giving it undue influence on the politics of Central America and the Caribbean. The United Fruit Company was commonly known as El Pulpo, the octopus. Its tentacles were everywhere, not just in banana plantations, but in telecommunications, transport, and education too. The company had a cozy relationship with Guatemala's leader, Jorge Ubico, a dictator described as one of the most oppressive tyrants Guatemala has ever known. With Ubico's support, the company faced little resistance over its widespread exploitation and labor abuses. But in June of 1944, the tides seemed to shift. The Guatemala Revolution forced Ubico to resign after over a decade in power. In the aftermath of the revolution, Guatemala went through its first legitimate elections in history, promptly electing liberal reformers who promised to introduce a minimum wage, build 6,000 schools, and establish near-universal voting rights. By 1951, with the election of Jacobo Arbenz, Guatemala began eyeing a bigger target, taking back control of its economy. The Arbenz administration passed Decree 900, aiming to transfer unused land held by large property owners to landless farmers. Much of this land belonged to United Fruit. This wasn't an unlawful seizure. The government paid for every acre it took, but it paid what United Fruit claimed the land was worth, and to avoid taxes, the company had vastly undervalued its holdings. As such, by the end of 1952, the Arbenz administration had reclaimed 40% of the company's land at little cost. This was a welcome development for the people of Guatemala, but not for the United Fruit Company. At this point in time, the Cold War was in full swing, and in America, communism was a pervasive boogeyman. and when Dwight Eisenhower was elected US President in 1953, he promised to take a hard line against communism. Sensing an opportunity to salvage this crisis for United Fruit, Bernays suggested that the company's PR chief, Ed Whitman, take US reporters on a tour of Guatemala and persuade them that what they were seeing was early-stage communism taking root. Bernays planted articles in the press about the growing influence of communism in Latin America, articles that were seen by President Eisenhower, and the idea that a communist state could rise in America's backyard was something that could not be tolerated.
I've spent many years as a newsman traveling in Central and Tropical America, and I think I understand something of what this part of the world means to us. But before we show you some of the reasons why the Kremlin must hate bananas, let's glance at a map of Central America, where most of the fruit comes from. Central America is just what its name implies, the heart of the Americas. A few days by ship from the United States, a few hours by plane, or a few minutes by guided missile.
Arbenz, of course, was not a communist, but he certainly had left-leaning tendencies. And while Bernays used his power over the press to cement the idea of communism taking root in Guatemala, Sam Zemurray wanted more than ideas. He wanted action, and he had some influential friends in Washington, D.C. Eisenhower's staff included Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and CIA Chief Allen Dulles. Both Dulles brothers had significant links to the United Fruit Company. The two Dulles brothers had previously been senior members of the law firm Sullivan and Cromwell, which represented the United Fruit Company. In his book, An American Company, The Tragedy of United Fruit, Thomas McCann, the company's former vice president, claimed that John Foster Dulles was a key figure in the land giveaways that gave United Fruit ownership of 42% of Guatemala's land. And what's more, the wife of Ed Whitman, United Fruit's internal PR man, was Eisenhower's personal secretary. The stage was set. Allen Dulles and the CIA launched Operation PB Success. The plan was to run a propaganda campaign called Sherwood, using radio broadcasts to spread the message that communism was a great evil and that President Arbenz was a puppet of the Kremlin, who had sold Guatemala to a cabal of international communists. The second, more direct stage of the operation involved funding, arming, and supporting a group of rebels opposed to the Arbenz administration and installing a new regime friendlier to US interests. The CIA identified Castillo Armas as the man they needed, a military officer who had opposed Guatemala's first democratically elected government. After a failed coup in 1941, Armas went into exile in Honduras, seeking support for another revolt. He came to the attention of the Central Intelligence Agency. On June 16, 1954, a Castillo Armas force supported by the CIA was dispatched to Guatemala City. The CIA provided aircraft for an aerial assault on the country that caused little damage but did support the idea that the insurgency was much larger than it really was. Ultimately, it was the Guatemalan army that forced Arbenz to step down. Fearing reprisals from the US should they be victorious against the invasion, Guatemalan army officers demanded Arbenz's resignation. He resigned on June 27, 1954, and was granted political asylum in Mexico. A colonel in the Guatemalan army then attempted to take power, but after a bloodless coup, Castillo Armas became the sole leader of Guatemala. The US immediately recognized Castillo Armas' new government, and to maintain an image of democracy, he launched elections in early October of 1954. However, Armas banned all opponents, and he won the election with 99% of the vote. But he didn't enjoy his victory for long. He was assassinated in June of 1957. The 1954 coup, while immediately celebrated as a success by the CIA, triggered domestic corruption and instability in Guatemala that ultimately led to the Guatemalan Civil War, which began in 1960 and did not see an end until 1996. Political violence from the conflict took the lives of over 200,000 Guatemalans, a reality that Guatemala continues to grapple with today. In 1947, Edward Bernays published an essay detailing his methods and philosophy. It's called The Engineering of Consent. Those methods quickly became part of the public relations playbook for corporations and politicians. Some of those campaigns were a particularly dark chapter for the PR industry. After the success of Bernays' Torches of Freedom campaign, Big Tobacco was faced with a crisis. There was growing evidence that smoking caused lung cancer. In December of 1953, the CEOs of the major tobacco companies met secretly in New York City. Their purpose was to counter the damage from studies linking smoking to lung cancer. A year earlier, Reader's Digest, then the public's leading source of medical information, had printed an article entitled "Cancer by the Carton." After it appeared, cigarette sales plummeted for 2 years, the first decline of the century with the exception of the Great Depression. The tobacco industry approached John Hill, founder of PR firm Hill & Knowlton, and using the techniques Bernays had pioneered, they created a frank statement to cigarette smokers and paid to have it published in 448 newspapers on January 4th, 1954. The statement included the signatures of the nation's top tobacco executives and assured Americans that we accept an interest in people's health as a basic responsibility, paramount to every other consideration in our business. Furthermore, they promised that we will always have and always will cooperate closely with those whose task it is to safeguard the public's health. The frank statement was a charade, the first step in a concerted half-century-long campaign to mislead the public about the catastrophic effects of smoking and avoid any public policy that might damage sales. In October of 1990, 4 months after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, a 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl named Nayira appeared before a public hearing of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus on Capitol Hill in Washington and gave this testimony.
I stayed behind and wanted to do something for my country. It's the second week after the invasion. I volunteered at the Al-Adan hospital with 12 other women who wanted to help as well. I was the youngest volunteer. The other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying. I could not help but think of my nephew, who, if born premature, might have died that day as well.
More than 700 TV stations broadcast the appearance of Nurse Nayira, which shocked the US public and increased support for military action against Saddam Hussein's Iraq. 3 months later, Operation Desert Storm began. The incubator story, however, was not true, and the 15-year-old Nayira turned out to be the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the US. This was only discovered after the war was over in January 1992, when it became known that once again, PR firm Hill & Knowlton was behind the story. The firm's client was Citizens for a Free Kuwait, an organization funded by the exiled Kuwaiti government. The group wanted to convince the US public to take action against Iraq, and they did, in a textbook example of the engineering of consent. Bernays, who lived to the age of 103, died in 1995. He was often critical of how the public relations industry had developed. He told the New York Times in an interview conducted in honor of his 100th birthday that any dope, any nitwit, any idiot can call him or herself a public relations practitioner. However, he said he would be happy to be called the father of public relations when the field is taken seriously, like law or architecture. In his later years, he was revered as the master of his craft. Bernays regarded himself as a member of an intelligent minority who could steer the masses at the push of a button. What he often forgot to mention, however, was that it was always his clients who decided to what end the buttons were pushed. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, have a look at some of the others on the channel.